The advice to warm up your car on a cold morning was never wrong. It just quietly stopped being true, and nobody bothered to send you the memo. For 50 years, you did exactly what you were taught. Start it up, let it sit and idle a few minutes, let it come up to temperature before you back out of the driveway. That was the right thing to do. It kept a lot of engines alive. The problem is that the engine under your hood today is not the engine you learned that rule on. They changed the machine and left the old instructions sitting in your head. After more than 20 years in the shop, I can tell you that the long, cold morning idle, the one that feels careful, the one that feels like you're being good to the car, is doing the opposite. It's quietly wearing the engine out from the inside. And the part that'll surprise you is where the damage happens and how little it costs to stop it. Let me show you what actually changed under there. The warm-up habit came from the carburetor. Every car built before about the 1980s had one, and a carburetor in the cold was a genuinely temperamental thing. Cold gasoline doesn't want to vaporize, and a carburetor had no way to compensate for that. Drive off cold and it would stumble, stall, and run rough until everything warmed up. So you sat and let it idle first. You had to. That advice was correct for that machine, and your father was right to teach it to you. Back then, you even had a choke to fuss with, a little lever or a pull knob that fed the cold engine extra fuel until it caught its breath and settled. The whole ritual existed to nurse a machine that genuinely could not handle the cold on its own. Then fuel injection took over, and the whole problem it solved just went away. A modern engine has sensors reading the temperature and a computer metering the fuel precisely, adjusting from the very first second. It doesn't stumble when it's cold, and it doesn't need you to sit there babysitting it. But here's the part nobody ever put on a sign. That same computer, on a cold start, deliberately dumps extra fuel into the engine. It runs rich on purpose because cold gas still burns poorly, and the extra fuel keeps things running smooth until the engine warms up. That's harmless when it's brief. The trouble starts the moment you make it last. Here's what they don't tell you at the dealership, and what the old advice all but guarantees you'll get wrong. Idling does not warm your engine up. It warms the coolant, the stuff that eventually blows heat into the cabin. But the oil, the thing actually protecting the engine, barely gets warm at all at idle. Oil gets its heat from load, from the engine actually working, down in the bearings. Sitting in the driveway at idle, there's almost no load on it, so the oil stays cold and the computer keeps running that rich mixture. Maybe you're thinking the oil has to warm up before you dare drive. That cold oil won't flow, and you'll hurt something by pulling out too soon. That was a real concern with the thick oils of decades past. Today's oils are built to flow the instant the engine turns over, even in deep cold. The moment that oil pressure light goes out, every part that matters already has oil on it. Waiting past that point does nothing for the oil and everything for the fuel wash. So the longer you idle to warm it up, the longer you hold the engine in the exact condition that does the harm. Cold, running rich, dumping raw fuel where it was never meant to go. You're not protecting it, you're marinating it. There's a second thing that long idle can't do, while we're at it. It can't bring your catalytic converter up to temperature the way driving does, so all those cold minutes run dirtier out the tailpipe on top of everything else. Idling is the slow way to warm the car and the dirty way, both at the same time. And it gets worse the colder it is out, which is the cruel twist of the whole thing. The mornings you feel like you most need that long warm-up are the very mornings it costs you the most. Knowing the engine runs rich is one thing. What that raw fuel does once it's in there is where the real damage lives, and it's happening in two places at the same time. Gasoline is a solvent. That's easy to forget because we think of it as fuel, but chemically it's a degreaser, and it cuts oil the same way it cuts the grease off your hands at the sink. On a cold, rich start, some of that extra gas never burns. It lands on the cylinder walls, the smooth, polished bores the pistons ride up and down inside, and it washes the thin film of oil right off the metal. Mechanics have a name for it: cylinder washdown or bore wash. For those minutes, the piston rings are sliding on bare, unlubricated metal, thousands of strokes a minute, exactly when the engine is coldest and most fragile. Do it for 30 seconds and then drive away, the oil film comes right back and no harm is done. Do it for 10 or 15 minutes every winter morning for years on end, and you're grinding a little more off those rings and cylinders every single day. That's the first place. The second one is down underneath. All that raw, unburned fuel doesn't only wash the walls. A good share of it slips straight past the rings and drips down into the oil pan, into your oil supply itself. It's called fuel dilution, and it does precisely what it sounds like. The gasoline thins your oil out, and thin oil means a weaker protective film everywhere it matters. The bearings, the camshaft, every surface the oil is supposed to be cushioning. Riding along with that fuel is water and acid, both byproducts of combustion that a cold engine can't cook back off. Those acids go to work on the very additives in the oil that keep it protecting your engine. It lands hardest on the newer engines too. A lot of what's been built in the last 15 years runs gasoline direct injection, which already has a reputation for carbon buildup and for letting fuel sneak into the oil. Long, cold idles pour gas on that fire. It's the single worst habit for the exact engines most likely to be sitting in a driveway today. Don't assume an older, high-mileage engine is the exception that still earns the long warm-up either. It's the reverse. A tired engine with a couple 100,000 miles on it already has more wear in the bores and rings, so even more of that raw fuel slips past, and even more oil gets stripped off the walls. The habit is roughest on exactly the old, faithful, paid-off engines. This whole thing is about keeping alive. Idle long enough, often enough, and the oil in your pan slowly stops being oil. It goes dark and thin and starts heading toward a tar-like sludge, the kind that clogs the narrow passages feeding oil up to the top of the engine and starves the parts that need it most. None of this trips a warning light either. There's no sensor watching for a washed cylinder or thinning oil, so the dash stays dark and content while the wear quietly stacks up underneath, which is exactly how it sneaks up on the most careful owners, the ones who thought the long warm-up was them doing everything right. Now here's the tell that proves the car makers have known all of this the whole time. Open your owner's manual to the maintenance section and read what they list under severe service, the punishing conditions that quietly double how often you're supposed to change your oil. Short trips in cold weather and extended idling are sitting right there in the fine print. They know exactly what it does. They just buried it on a page nobody reads instead of telling you straight. I've watched the two habits end up in completely different places. Take two Subaru Outbacks, same model year, both living through hard northern winters, both owned by somebody who took good care of them. One owner did what his dad taught him, fired it up, went back inside, let it idle a solid 10 minutes every frozen morning before he pulled out. The other gave it half a minute and drove off nice and gentle. Pull the oil on both a few years down the road, and it is not close. The long idle car's oil comes out darker and thinner and smelling faintly of gas, with more carbon and more wear up top. The start and drive car's oil still looks and behaves like oil. Same car, same winters, same care. One habit quietly aged the engine, and the other one didn't. And I'm curious where you land on this. Drop a comment and tell me how long you let it idle on a cold morning. And while you're at it, who first told you that you had to? I'd put money on it being a father or a grandfather, back when that was still the right answer. Quick reminder while we're here, if this is the kind of straight talk you wish somebody had given you years ago, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. It really does help us keep making these. Now for the good news, and it's real good news. The fix costs you nothing, takes less time than what you're already doing, and it's the easiest thing in this entire video. Here's the whole thing, start to finish. On a cold morning, start the engine and give it about 30 seconds. That's plenty of time for the oil pump to push oil everywhere it needs to be, which happens the instant that oil pressure light clicks off, not 5 minutes later. Then just drive. Gently. Keep it easy on the throttle. No hard acceleration and no flooring it up the on-ramp until the temperature gauge starts to lift off the bottom. That's it. That's the entire fix. The one thing to steer clear of is the opposite move, jumping in and revving it hard or racing off cold to get it over with. Cold, thick oil and high RPM are a bad pairing. Light and easy for that first mile or two is the whole trick. If you change your own oil, a good cold weather synthetic in the grade your manual calls for, a 0W or a 5W, flows even faster on those brutal mornings and buys you one more layer of protection in that first critical minute. Driving under a light load is the thing that actually warms the oil, and it brings the whole engine up to temperature 2 or 3 times faster than idling ever could. You'll get warm air in the cabin sooner too, not later, which is the thing most people are really sitting there idling for in the first place. If it's brutally cold out, 10 or 20 below, give it a full minute instead of 30 seconds. But that's the ceiling. Idling longer than that isn't babying the engine. It's the opposite. And now you know why. And if you love your remote start, you don't have to give it up. Use it to knock the chill off the cabin if you want to. Just understand that the second you climb in, you drive, because the warm-up that actually protects the engine happens out on the road, never in the driveway. Now, frost on the glass is a different matter and worth saying plainly. If you can't see out, scrape it or run the defroster for the minute it takes to clear. That's a safety call, not a warm-up, and it's the one honest reason to give the car a little extra time before you roll. Clear the glass, then go. The whole thing is free. You're not buying a part, you're not booking an appointment, you're just spending less time doing something that was quietly hurting the car. And once you see what the old habit costs on the other end, free starts to look like the best deal in this whole video. Let's talk real numbers, because this cost is a sneaky one that hides for years. The first hit is your oil. Because cold idling forces fuel and water and acid into it, the oil wears out far faster. That's the severe service line in your manual again. You end up needing oil changes twice as often just to break even, and a full synthetic change runs you $40 to $70 every time you're back in there early. Let that slide, and the sludge and the carbon up top keep building. Now you're looking at a proper cleanup. $300 to $600 to get the intake, the valves, and the rings sorted out. And that's only if it's caught in time. There's a smaller cost you hand over every single morning, too, in plain cash. Every minute that engine sits idling is fuel burned to move you exactly nowhere, and restarting a modern engine uses about the same gas as 5 seconds of idling. So those 10 and 15-minute warm-ups, all winter long, are just dollars going straight out the tailpipe. You're paying, morning after morning, for the privilege of wearing your own engine down. If it isn't caught in time, the bore wash and the watered-down oil have been quietly grinding away at the rings and bearings for years. That's the bill nobody wants to hear. An engine that's worn out early, burning oil and knocking, is a rebuild or a replacement, and on most of these vehicles that lands somewhere between $5,000 and $8,000. Now set that number next to a man on a fixed income who bought this truck to be the last one he ever has to buy. I had a retired grocery store manager come in from over in Michigan, driving a clean 2015 GMC Sierra he was proud of, faithful as they come about warming it up. 15 minutes every cold morning, certain he was doing right by it. That engine started burning oil and running rough well before it ever should have, and the cause wasn't bad luck. It was 15 winters of long, cold idles doing exactly what we just walked through, one morning at a time. Here's the quiet fear sitting underneath all of it. On a fixed income, the thing you really dread isn't the repair bill. It's the morning somebody tells you the engine's finished, and it'd be cheaper to just buy something newer. That's a car payment you were never going to take on again, landing on you because of a habit you always believed was protecting the car. The engine you were trying so hard to save quietly becomes the reason you get pushed into financing the next one. That's the part that ought to make you angry, and it's exactly why I won't blame you for a single second of it. You weren't careless. You were loyal to advice that was dead right when you learned it, and not one person behind a service counter ever stood you up and told you the engine underneath had changed. So here's the whole thing in one breath. Give it 30 seconds, then drive gentle, because the oil only warms under load, and that long cold idle just washes your cylinders and thins your oil for no good reason at all. Tomorrow morning, try it. Start it, count to 30, and pull out easy. That one small change, starting tomorrow, quietly hands you back years on an engine you were about to wear out by being kind to it. And if you want the next piece of this, the oil change interval the dealer stretched just long enough to walk you past the warranty, not long enough to actually protect the engine, click the video on the left. I'll see you there.